All right. My name is Denise Scales, and I am a descendant of DeWitt, Nebraska. Today we have with us Debora Heard. She is a PhD candidate in anthropology at the University of Chicago, specializing in Nubian archaeology and Egyptian history and language. For the past 2 years, Deborah has served as the project coordinator for Charting Our Paths, celebrating 50 years of Black study at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Deborah, we really thank you for your time today. We welcome you today, and I am so excited today to hear what is the enigmatic queen, Cleopatra, and tell us about your role in the documentary of Cleopatra. And thank you again. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Sister Denise, for inviting me. I hope that we can actually kind of open this up more as a discussion, as opposed to me just talking. My role in the documentary.
Well, looks like I can't hear Denise. Can you hear me?
Yes, she's freezing.
Yeah, she's freezing.
Okay, maybe she'll open back up here. Because the weather is really bad here. Today it's
Okay,
been
now she's back.
There she goes.
Okay, am I back? I am so
Yes.
sorry. It just said it was I disconnected, and that's almost never happened to me before.
Okay.
But yeah, so what I was saying is the producers reached out to one of the women who was one of the scholars in the documentary and asked if there were other people that she could suggest. So she suggested myself and my colleague, Solange Ashby. Solange decided that she did not want to do it, but I went ahead and did it. And my reasoning for doing it was not so much that I'm a great fan of Cleopatra, because I'm not, but I wanted to stay in it so that I could suggest other queens. So my research area is the Nile Valley, but I have specialized in ancient Nubia. And so my purpose for staying was to promote the African queens in Kush. So I was telling me, like, yeah, you hear about Cleopatra, but do you know about Amonaranis? Do you know about Amonishketo? So these are names that you need to know. These are names that people don't know. And so every time I would meet with the producer, I was like, yeah, but when you talk about Cleopatra, but like Amonaranis, she was around at the same time. And she, so eventually she went back to the production team. And so hopefully if there's a second season, then they will focus on one of the Kushite queens. So that was my main purpose for really, sticking it out. I named this presentation, or this discussion that we're having, the Enigmatic Queen, because it's like Cleopatra's like this puzzle. People are always wondering like who she is or who she was. But to me, the enigma is, why are there so many people? What is the attraction of modern day people to Cleopatra? That's the question or puzzle for me. Because to me, she was not the most fascinating or powerful of the Egyptian queens to have ruled. For me, Hatshepsut would be the one that I would, favor. But yeah, it's just the question of what is it about Cleopatra that resonates with people for the past, I'd say, 100 years, that there's this this battle over who she was. So the enigma part is that she's portrayed in so many different ways. So there are coins that you see of her that depict her, and she has a certain look. You see her somewhere else, she's heavy set. Somewhere else, she has like a hook nose. So it's like there's so many different depictions of her. It's very hard to pin down what she actually looked like. But I think the big question, the big debate is her race and her phenotype. That's the big debate. And I'll just say, she comes late in the history. This is another thing that I think I have a question about. It's like people are there's such a struggle to claim her. It's like, but you have to understand the history. She comes at the end of the Ptolemaic reign. The Ptolemies were Greek colonizers. Alexander, who they call Alexander the Great, but I figure he's only great to the people of Greece and Macedon. If you were on the colonizing end, you would call him Alexander the Colonizer or Alexander the Conqueror.
Right.
But Alexander came in 332 BC and conquered Egypt. That is the last time that when that last reigning king, that was the last indigenous Egyptian to rule Egypt. You know, a person who was of Egyptian blood. So the question about Cleopatra, of course, is about, well, maybe her mother was Egyptian. And perhaps her mother was Egyptian, but we also have to look at the time period at which her mother would have been there. We're looking at the Delta region, which is in the north. So all throughout Egyptian history, people have been coming in through that Gaza Strip. That's the connection between the African continent and the other parts of the Eastern world, is right there at Egypt. So people historically, even before there was an Egypt, people were coming across that pass from the Semitic world, from the Canaan, what we call Canaan, from Arabia. All those people were coming across. And then you had people that were to the west, the Libyans, they were coming across. So you have this mix of populations that have been coming across for millennia, not just a century or two. So you have to think at this late period, they've already been conquered by the Persians twice. And then the Macedons or the Greeks come in. They set up their own city in Alexandria. They built Alexandria, and it is its own self-contained city. But you have people coming from all over the Mediterranean. So it's like, this is like this melting pot, So if her mother was Egyptian, what does that mean at that time period? Her mother was an Egyptian who might have been a daughter of a priest of one of the gods in the north. Well, if you want to stay in power, you're trying to create these marriages. So would she have been a pure Egyptian to begin with? Aside from the fact that you've had these millennia of people coming in and these mixing of populations. So even if her mother was Egyptian, that doesn't necessarily mean that Cleopatra had African blood, So it's even, and then you have to ask the question, well, even if she did have some African blood, what does that mean? Because her psyche, the way that she functioned, was the same as any of the other Greek Ptolemaic rulers. She was the first and the only one to actually learn the Egyptian language. So what does that mean? So that means that these people have been in Egypt for centuries, like 2 or 3 centuries, and they didn't even bother to learn the language. That's colonizing mentality, you know? So I just have to really question the fascination with Cleopatra. She, in the end, she lost Egypt to Rome. Egypt became a Roman colony. But if you look at it from the political viewpoint, it just went from being an internal colony because the Macedonians and the Greeks came in and colonized and created a settler colonialism on the banks of the Mediterranean. They didn't really even go down into the Nile. They were on the Mediterranean Sea. So you go from having these internal colonizers to the Romans, who are external colonizers, but they're still colonizers. They still colonized Egypt. So I don't still, and I guess this is a discussion that we can have, you know, what is the modern fascination with Cleopatra?
I've got so many questions. I don't even know where to begin.
Okay.
But let me just start with this. Time periods are significant to me, and that's what we've been talking about in our podcast. Trying to trace back the history to Africans' origin and its indigenous people. So with that as a background, I like to look at this segment, this part of the world, in time periods. You mentioned Kushites, which I love. I would like to actually put it in the context of Kemet, because that helps to explain its origin. And to your point, it talks about all of the different cultures. And the reason I personally like Kemet, because it ties into the indigenous original Africans who were the original pharaohs. And when you go there, you can explain the immigration, migration, transition, whatever the word is, of the origin of Egypt, and I use the word Kemet, and how it got to where it is today. So to me, I agree with your question. I think the fascination is distorted, and I would say is consistent with how we, as a humanity society, distort African history. So my answer to your question, why is there a fascination with Cleopatra, is because it's a continuation of the distortion of African history. Just as with Hannibal, you've got the same discussion with Hannibal, who was a Carthaginian, which is an African country, and there's still discussion about him. I've actually seen pictures of him as a Greek when Carthage is in Africa. So to me, it's a continuation of that historical distortion. Is my way of answering your question. Now, my question to you is, in your studies, I would imagine you went all the way back to Kemet, and could you do some discussions on Kemet and how we evolved from Kemet into Egypt, into Kush, and you could go all the way into the Sumerians in Macedonia. But because again, it depends on which time period you're talking about.
Right. And I think that part of the issue with the question about Cleopatra exposes another bigger issue, and that is how we look at ancient people, and especially the people in Kemet, the people of Kush. Egyptologists, when they came in and began looking at the artifacts and looking at the remains, you know, they were the ones that basically took those artifacts and created a story, a narrative. And we are dealing with the narrative that's been created for like over a century. You know, part of the framework of that narrative is defining people, you know. So it's like they were trying to find out who were the ancient Egyptians. So if you go back and you look at the things that Petrie was writing in the early 1900s, like 1902, they were trying to find who were the ancient Egyptians and trying to create a race, to racialize them. And I think that part of our problem is we're still thinking in those same terms, that we have to put them in a particular race, that all of the Egyptians were a particular race of people. And that's wrong. Because if you look at the archaeology and you go back past, and that's the other thing about it, the creation of these disciplines, Egyptology, that cordons off Egypt, the study of Egypt, to a particular time and particular geographical space. So you're just looking at Egypt, and you're just looking at the beginning of the Pharaonic period. And again, that's wrong. You have to look at what's going on around. You have to look at what's going on in all of the African regions around Egypt, Kemet. But you also have to look back even more historically than that. People don't just pop up out the ground, you know?
Right.
So it's like, so there's been an argument that the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians were always here. It's like, but they came from somewhere. They didn't pop out the ground.
Right.
So my teachers, I go all the way back to the first Homo sapiens.
Yes.
Because you have to go back. If you want to understand how people got to where you got to go back to where mankind came from. Yes. So the earliest humans, modern humans, are known to have originated in Ethiopia.
Yes.
300,000 years ago.
I have a question for you. What is the role of the Nubians in this history?
Well, I'll get to that. I'll get to that because but now we also have another early modern human or pre-modern coming out of Morocco, Jebel El Houd. So that's in the past few years they've been. So now that there's this theory that modern humans evolved in different parts of the continent, and then they migrated and they mixed and mingled and made it. And so to me, when we think about human history, it's a history of migration. So we have to think about migrations of people.
Right.
The climate change around 10,000 BC, when you have the Green Sahara. So you have people coming up from the south because the Sahara Desert wasn't a desert anymore. There were animals, there was water, there was, fresh vegetation. So people were moving up. But then around 6,000 BC, as the climate started to start turning dry again, people started reading the signs. And, it's like, okay, so this is starting to dry up. Maybe I need to move to more permanent water sources. People started moving where the major river sources. People started moving east to the Nile and west to the Niger. So you see these population movements. So this is, again, before there is a Kemet, before there's a Kush, people are just moving around the landscape, trying to survive, trying to find places where they can, live and settle. So you see in the desert regions around where that's in the Sahara now, but you see that there are populations of people that were living there who had cattle. And we see their remains. They made huge stone monuments. The largest, probably oldest stone monument on the African continent. We think about Djoser Step Pyramid, but there's a stone structure that exists a couple of thousand years before that, that's built in the desert called at Nabta Playa. There's these stone circles, sort of like Stonehenge, but they're older than Stonehenge. Mm-hmm. These people, and they're cattle burials out there. So that these were cattle pastoralists. Why were they building these stone circles? Well, a couple of them we know to be what they call calendrical stones. They're calendars. So and there are two uprights that are carved, and imagine being out this is like 6,000 BC. Where are they getting tools to cut big, huge pieces of stone, and not only just cut them, but put them in? So they had to move them and then put them in place and then orient them. You know, they didn't have the we think about what did they use to make the pyramids. It's like, what did these people out of the desert 6,000 years ago, what did they use to carve these big, huge stones? And they're weathered, so you can imagine they were even bigger when they were first placed there. But they're arranged so that these two uprights, the sun on the winter solstice rises between the two uprights. What's the point of that? Well, during the winter solstice, that's about the time that the rains started Ethiopia. The rains in Ethiopia causes the floods that bring the silt down, that fertilize the Nile Valley. And when the floods subside, you have all this nice fertilizer that causes plants and things to grow. So that's what has kept the Nile Valley fertile for all that time. That's usually why people settled there, because they had all of this green lushness next to the river. But that was because of the rains coming from Ethiopia, bringing down the silt. If you're out in the desert, which probably wasn't the desert at the time, but you need to move your cattle, and you know that there will be fresh grass for your cattle after the rain subside next to the Nile River, but you far out in the desert. But you see the sunrise between those two uprights. You're like, okay, so I know that in a cycle of maybe 2 moons, the grass will be growing there. So I need to, and however you calculate time, you know how long it takes you to get from where you are to get to the Nile River. So you say, well, okay, in the cycle of, the next full moon, that's when we need to pack up and start moving. Because people read the signs, they read nature. So these are some of the people you think about. Where did the people come from that settled in Kemet and that settled in Kush? These people are moving back and forth. They're moving up and down. So it is not just one people. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. We talk about the Egyptians as if they were just one people. But before there was the Egyptian state, you had these different tribes of people that had to be unified. It's just the fact that the unifier came from the South. And that's where you see that pharaonic culture developing. So the earliest depictions of someone wearing a white crown, which is the crown of one of the crowns of the pharaoh, we see in the South before there's a unified Kemet. So the depiction of a pharaoh, what we know of as a pharaoh, that came from the South. Narmer came from the South. He unified. So he unified the people in the North with the people in the South. But the Southern culture, the Southern idea of what it meant to be a king, that was the one that became what we know of as ancient Egyptian culture. So we have to think about it that way. Kush, the Nubians, they were the tribes that settled south of that. But at Aswan, which is the border between Egypt and Nubia, you had people that were related on both sides of that. So that's the reason why you have people that we have Nubians now live in Aswan, and they have lived there for centuries. They're not new. The dam brought more to that area, but they had been living there before the dam was built. Mm-hmm. So we have to start thinking about, you have different groups of people that come together to form a people. And so that's what we do historically. When you look that far back, you're like, okay, so the Egyptians were the people of Kemet were these amalgamation of people that were unified, and they became a people. But you have to look at, where did they come from, and also who were the people that were bearing the culture that becomes what we think of as typical ancient Egyptian culture. Where did they come from? And those people came from the South.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is that we're all one because we blended together from different regions. And so the interesting I think that I saw on the documentary that there's always a fire to destroy history. And I always find that very interesting because also with the descendants of the witty, there was a fire and documents were destroyed. I also have a friend, she's Gullah Geechee. They had a fire and a lot of their documents were destroyed. So I'm just wondering, so whoever's creating these stories, they repeat their stories over and over again. And a fire is always a good analogy of why our history was destroyed or misplaced. Yeah.
And for us as African people, and especially when we talk about Brother Roper, you were asking about Nubia. So for most of Nubian history, the history of the Nubian peoples, and I say peoples because there were different tribes of people, was oral. It was an oral history. They didn't have a writing. So it wasn't until we know about their ancient history, mainly from the inscriptions written by the people of Kemet. Okay. That's how we first get some indication of their relationship, is because the people of Kemet are describing them and talking about their relationships with them. Right. After the in the 18th dynasty, Upper Nubia is conquered by the pharaohs of Kemet. And so it becomes all of Nubia becomes a part of the larger, basically the 18th dynasty created an empire. So it became a part of the empire. But during that time, especially in Upper Nubia, they were creating, the pharaohs of Kemet were dotting the Nubian landscape with these temples. So they began to worship the god Amun, which was the Egyptian god, but they worshipped him in a way that was a little bit, I wouldn't say a little bit different, but he had a different manifestation. So in Kemet, he's human-headed. In Nubia, he's in the form of a ram. So he's either ram-headed or he's fully ram. And so a lot of archaeologists and people that study Nubia believe that there was a pre-existing ram god that got synthesized with Amun. And so what they were worshiping was Amun, but they were still worshiping Amun, but they were worshiping him in an indigenous form. Okay, yeah. But yeah, so it's after that time they began to adopt the Medu Neter, the hieroglyphic writing system. So when you have the 25th dynasty, the Kushite kings that ruled Kemet, their inscriptions are in the hieroglyphics. And it's not until later around 350, 320 BC, when the capital moves to Meroe, that the Nubians or the Kushites developed their own script to write their language. And the thing about it is that it's still not deciphered. So and we don't have a Rosetta Stone yet. So a lot of the Meroitic inscriptions, we know what the letters mean, and there's some where you can identify some words, but the grammatical structure is not the same as the Kemetic system. It's not the same as any of the other surrounding languages. So they're still trying to figure out grammar.
All right. With that, our time is
Is
up
it
already.
30 minutes up already? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I still want to call you doctor. Debora, so tell us, what are you gonna do next? And then we'll close with that.
Well, right now I'm still in the process of trying to finish writing my dissertation. And my dissertation compares the temples of Amun in Upper Nubia to temples that were dedicated to the god Apetamak, who was a truly indigenous Nubian god. He was a lion-headed god.
Okay.
And so I'm comparing the inscriptions and the iconography in an effort to find out what the rulers thought it meant to be a good ruler. So what things that they record on these temples that they did for the gods and for the people that indicate what they thought they should be doing for the gods and the people. And I say rulers because we have ruling queens in Merowe. So that includes them as well. So that's mainly my main focus, doing a few trips to Egypt. That's kind of it. That's more than enough. Aside from working a full-time job.
Denise, if you will allow me to just ask one other question, and if I'll go ahead and say Dr. Heard also, would maybe allow us to have another session, because this one is a whole nother 30-minute discussion.
Right, because we really still didn't talk about Cleopatra.
Right.
So my question is that, and it's part of the Cleopatra thing, current day Egyptians have a view of the world, and that's why they are so critical of a Black Cleopatra. In that context, it seems to me that the Americas have the same challenge.
Yeah.
So in America, we've got a just over 200-year history here. And Americans today see America as a view. And quite frankly, some of the same experiences in Egypt are here. Particularly if you go to South America, you got some of those same artifacts that you've mentioned now. So basically my question is, if we have that same discussion in the Americas, and I say that plurally, you have the same confusion that you have in Egypt in the Americas. So have you thought about that and addressed that? And without answering that, obviously that gets complex. So I guess my question, would you be interested in having another session just to discuss that topic?
Sure. I mean, what is going on in Egypt right now, and the because this isn't the first controversy that has come up around the Egyptian heritage and Black people. So, but there is an effort to deny any Africanity to the people of ancient Yemen.
Yeah.
And I see that you have to also put it in the context of modern politics and what's going on. There is a movement because, and it's funny because I've talked to several people who are older than myself, who said, well, when did this happen? Because, I was back in Egypt in the 70s and, it was Pan-Africanism and, there wasn't this bias against, Africans. When did this happen? There is a different nationalistic movement going on right now. And as a matter of fact, did you all see the news that came out like a couple of weeks ago where the ministry revoked the license of those Dutch archaeologists because they have a museum exhibit in Leiden that talks about basically the museum exhibit is about African Americans and I say African Caribbeans because Rihanna is from the Caribbean. She's not African American. She's from one of the Americas, but she's from the Caribbean. Yeah, but it's about the usage by the performers, the use of Egypt and Nubia in their music and in their performances. And so it's a really, so, you know, they go back and they got a whole, I went on their website, they got a whole 100 song playlist. You know, they got Sun Ra, they've got Earth, Wind and Fire, you know, the people that were actually integrating the symbols and the ministry was like, what was in the news is, I am tired of people looking at Beyonce trying to be Nefertiti, and this is falsification of our history, and we're revoking your license to excavate at Saqqara. And so the person that the curator of the exhibit was saying, you know, you're not even, nobody's even been here to look at this exhibit, so I don't know what your complaint is, because what you're saying is not what the exhibit is about. And then because the curator, he's half Egyptian, and he said, you know, this is part of a nationalistic move.
Yeah.
So we have to understand that, you know, when I'm in Egypt, the people are cool. Right. You know, they're not like, you're black. They're not doing that. You know, and in fact, I was at Cairo, and Cairo now, this is not even me being in the South where folks definitely look like me. It was a guy in Cairo who was chasing me down. He was selling stuff, and he was calling me, you know, so some people have more English than other people. Right. So to get my attention, he was calling me my same color. And so he was like chasing me. He said, my same color. And when I finally turned around, right. And he said, my same color. And he put his arm next to me. Now, he was much lighter than I was. I mean, but, you know, he was like, he that's a good one. I like about that. The kinship with me, and I'm with all these white people. But he was like, but I was the one that was his same color. Right. So what I'm saying, the politics is not, that doesn't boil down to the people, the day-to-day people. You know, they have a different understanding. And so we also have to look at that, like, you know, who are we fighting against? It's not all Egyptians, you know, these comments and this negativity is not all Egyptians. It is a certain segment of the population. Just like, and they're the people that have power. Yeah. So you also have to look at it that way.
Yeah, the continuation of separation. So come together as a people so that we can be strong.
Right. All right, Denise, we're going to let you schedule the follow-up.
Sure. So I'm not gonna pick a date today. I'll talk with Debora later. Anyway, I just want to thank everyone for their time today, and we'll come back in 2 weeks. And if Debora has the time, we'll continue this conversation. And I just want to thank everyone today for their time. And I love the conversation. And
thank you, Debora.
This and thank you.
So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, Sister Avis, you threw us off with 4 D's and an A.
And her husband is a D for David. Yes. Yes.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody says the water is fine.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.